Now the Yarbo mower is a beast. Powerful, smart, and packed with potential. It's part of a modular system that can mow, blow leaves, or even clear snow. And for larger properties, it might just be the future of yard work. But after a full mowing season in a typical suburban yard like mine, I've learned where it works and where it might be a bit of overkill. So the question is it right for you? Hey there neighbors, it's Ryan the Tech Guy and welcome back to This Smart House. So here's what you need to know about getting started with a Yarbo. When you order it, you're actually choosing between different modules. Currently available as of 2025 are mowing, snow blowing, and leaf blowing. All these attach to the same base unit that they call the core. Now the system itself can handle up to about 6 acres of mowing, which is way more than most robot mowers. Now be prepared, because when mine arrived, it came in multiple large boxes. The core, the battery, the charging dock, and the RTK base station all shipped separately, and then I got the mowing module later on. Setup takes about 2 to 3 hours, and the most involved part was actually mounting the RTK base station on the roof line for maximum signal. One thing to note, you will need to run an Ethernet cable from your router, which will add some time and possibly some complexity. But once that's done, the app does walk you through finding the best signal strength possible, and it's actually pretty helpful. You do also have the option of placing this in the ground if you want to, but I would recommend mounting it to your roof line if that's a possibility. Because with all these mowers, the number one thing that makes the most difference is the signal strength for the RTK base station. Now swapping modules takes a bit of practice to get the alignment just right. Once you've done it a few times, it's pretty straightforward. With the mowing deck though, you might need a friend to help you lift it up the first time. Now one thing worth knowing, even if your mower arrives later on, the unit is still actually functional without it. You can use the core with the smart module to patrol your yard, tow stuff, or if you're feeling ridiculous, act as the world's most expensive Bluetooth speaker. That smart module comes with the core and contains cameras so the system can still operate. Now with the basics out of the way, let's get to what most people care about, the mowing. So when it comes to actual cut quality, Yarbo does a solid job, especially in large open areas with regularly maintained grass. The standard mowing module uses dual spinning discs with razor style blades, which are pretty similar to what you see on other robotic mowers. Now for the majority of my yard, I mow it twice a week, and the cut quality is clean and consistent. The default straight line pattern works well in open spaces and is probably the quickest. But you can also adjust the direction and overlap in the app. Now one thing to note, you can get more advanced with different mowing patterns, but that's going to add more mowing time and use more battery. And also, if you have a lot of tight corners or obstacles, it might miss spots as it tries to adjust to move around. All that to say, the standard mower does struggle a little bit with longer or thicker grass. I've noticed, especially in the area back behind my fence, the grass grows a lot taller and I don't mow it as frequently. And instead of cutting cleanly, the Yarbo will normally just lay the grass down. It's not really designed for a thicker growth like this, and it requires multiple passes or for you to go ahead and do some pre-work with another mower. So like all robo mowers, it's always a good idea to start with them at the beginning of the season. That way they can continuously maintain your yard throughout the rest of the year. Now a lot of that actually changes with the new Pro mowing module that was just released. This version swaps out the razor blades for a more traditional cutting blade and has been getting some really good feedback from other users. From what I've heard, it brings a lot of the performance closer to a conventional gas mower. So this is great for tougher lawns. So back to the standard unit. In tighter spaces and around curves, the Yarbo tends to struggle with some precision. It's cautious near fences and edges, which helps prevent damage, but can also leave small patches or require a manual trimming pass. But overall, on standard yards, it does a pretty great job. But if you do have taller grass or more complex yard layouts, you might want to keep an eye on it and really tune the different zones. Now the app does give you a lot of options, from how much overlap you have to the exact direction that you want it to mow, so you can really customize the way you want your lawn to look. Now let's start off with what I think really works with the Yarbo. So for the first item, I really feel the Yarbo feels overbuilt in a great way. The tracked base, the unit construction, and overall chassis are solid. Some reviewers even compare it to a BattleBot's vibe. Plus having the inductive wireless charging dock avoids corroded contacts and keeps things pretty low maintenance over the season. But you do have to be very particular about where you put the charging dock to make sure the robot has plenty of room around it. Now one of the main issues I've seen with some of the other mowers that I've tested is over time, those dock contacts start to wear, which means that you actually are gonna either have to replace them or continuously clean them throughout the season. Having the wireless dock is super nice because it can pull in with any accessory on it and still get a full charge. Now where mine is located is a little difficult because it's right next to a tree in the house, but I've ended up making it work well for me, even though sometimes I do have to go out and manually park the mower on the dock. It is a really tight area that it has to be in for the wireless charging to work. Next up, with navigation and mapping. With RTK set up correctly, it'll hold a map with impressive precision and moves with intent rather than just wandering around your yard. Pattern direction, overlap, and zone settings are all tweakable in the app, so dialing in a lawn is straightforward once the base station is placed well. Now I will say, during peak growing seasons, you get some great lines in the yard because of the weight of the unit. And in my yard, if I'm actually following the traditional lines of the yard instead of going at an angle, I find that the robot comes back with about 50% charge remaining, which is amazing because most other bots can't even finish my entire outer part of my yard in one go. And one nice feature is you can remotely nudge the unit out of trouble through the app when needed. You can actually view all 4 of the cameras around the unit from the app and use the remote control function to move it if necessary. Now, I actually use this in the real world. I was in Vietnam back in May and got a notification that the unit was stuck. It was pressed up against my fence and I had to move it back out again. So I was able to actually remotely control it from the other side of the world, pulling it out back into the yard so it could finish the job. And that way, even when I got back from my long trip, the yard was taken care of and looking nice. A lot of other mowers don't let you do this. You have to be within Bluetooth range to control it, so it's a nice touch, even though I'm not sure it's actually a feature. We'll have to see if Yarbo leaves that enabled in the future. So if you have a large yard that's relatively simple, these strengths add up to a reliable week-to-week routine. A lot of my family members have acreage, and this is about the only mower out there that can handle that much property. I think it does a fantastic job of mowing as long as you have the right yard. If it's tighter and more complex, you might want to keep watching because the next section we're going to talk about some of the disadvantages. So next up, let's talk about some of the struggles that I've ran into. Now, let me be clear. My intent is to let everybody know all of the ins and outs before committing to a large purchase. So don't let this list intimidate you. I just wanted to make sure you're informed. Now, the biggest problem that I ran into is tight spaces and angled corners. That long wheelbase and wide footprint can cause overcorrections in narrow zones and around obstacles. I have had it wedge itself against my fence a few times when backing up because of the thin post that I have. I also don't let it get too close to the curbs because it is 250 pounds when it's all put together, and moving it out of the way is not that easy. So I typically let it miss some of the very edge pieces of my sidewalk, and I go back and manually trim those later on. So if you have a lot of fence lines, curb edges, or narrow corridors, you might run into some problems, and you will really have to tweak it or follow up with a manual trim after the fact. You can also set up what they call dead end zones, which will allow the mower to go in and straight back out again, which is great for those pesky edges that I have up on my stop sign. But don't be afraid to leave a few areas and follow up with a quick trim. I only really trim about every 2 to 3 weeks, so it doesn't cost me a lot of time. Now, another small issue that I've seen about 3 or 4 times this season is map drift. Due to weather conditions or sometimes astrological conditions, you might notice that the map goes out of alignment. There is a button that if the robot is in the dock, it'll automatically correct for it, but I have noticed this be hit or miss sometimes, so I've actually had to go ahead and correct it using the app and then run a mowing job for it to actually disappear and be completely taken care of. Another small issue that I have is the way you edit zones. There really isn't a simple add or remove polygon editing. You actually have to put it into edit mode and then take the mower into the area, and it kind of talks you through how to add or remove from the zones. But if you have tight areas, sometimes it can get confused and try to cut a section instead of adding a section. So I'd like to see this more dialed in. I assume this is just to make it easier for most users, but if you have tighter spots like my edges, it's really hard for the robot to know if you actually want to add or you're just splitting the area overall. Now, as I mentioned before, the unit itself weighs about 250 pounds with the mowing deck, the battery, and the core unit all together. That means if it does get stuck, it's not the easiest thing in the world to get out. Now, with those tracks, it doesn't really get stuck in the yard very often. The biggest problem is if it gets wedged against something or gets high-centered over a curb. In those instances, I will just lift the front of the mowing deck and then use the app to have it back up, and usually it can recover itself. Another issue with the weight is it will tear up certain areas of your yard if it goes over it consistently. Like right in front of my dock, it's pretty much made it bald. So I went out to IKEA and bought these little pads, and I've got them sunk down in the mud, and it helps give it some grip without it tearing up the yard. Hopefully next season, it'll grow grass through it, and you'll hardly notice it. As I mentioned before, the dual razor discs do a great job if you're doing maintenance cutting, but if you've got taller growth, you really can't use it for that style of mower. So you might want to make sure you always mow your entire yard throughout the year, or if you've got difficult sections that you want to trim periodically, hit them with a manual trimmer first before you let the robot go crazy. Plus, having those razor blades requires you to do a lot more maintenance. Now, Yarbo claims that you only have to change the blades once a season, but most users say they flip them monthly and replace them every 2 months. You also have to take the deck off periodically and scrape out some of the extra debris. But one nice thing is if you're doing that maintenance mowing and you're not mowing in wet conditions, it shouldn't get a lot of buildup inside the deck. And then the physical controller that I was most excited about, I can find really finicky to actually get reconnected when I use it in the real world. For the most part, I end up just using the app and only really breaking out the controller if I'm doing something major. I do use the app a lot more, but I would like to have the physical controller be a little bit easier to get reactivated once you've used the unit for a while. But all in all, if your yard is open and simple, these are minor trade-offs. In a tighter suburban geometry like what I've got, you might need to watch it for a while and make small tweaks as you go along. This is especially important around corners, so I would recommend the first time you run it to have it do the perimeter first, because that's where usually all the tricky stuff is. Also, don't be afraid to use the no-go zones. That helps the planning software work around things like trees, and you get a much quicker response that way. It will avoid trees automatically, but if you plan ahead, then it will avoid it and actually make your mowing much quicker. You also want to make sure you watch out for things like water meter pits. I actually broke one of the blades off on my Yarbo because I didn't mark it as a no-go zone. And amazingly, the Yarbo kept going, but it did make a lot more noise. So just keep that in mind. Anything that might damage it, either it's too tall or too short, you might want to go ahead and create a no-go zone. Oh, and one more small annoyance is the sound. Unlike other mowers, this one actually you can hear when it runs. It's actually not the blades or the mowing deck, it's the motors for the tracks. Because of the high torque motors necessary for those tracks, it does make a noise as it runs. Now, it's nowhere as loud as a traditional mower, so you can run it early in the day or late at night, but if you have your windows open, you will notice the sound. Now that we've seen all the features and talked about where it works and it doesn't work, let's talk about who should get this mower. Now, I do think this is one of the most capable and well-built robotic yard systems that I've worked with. This thing is brilliant for larger yards with clear sky and room to turn. But it might be a little bit overkill and fussy in tight suburban geometry unless you plan carefully. The fact that this thing can mow, leaf blow, and snow clear all with the same main unit is amazing. I've actually got the leaf blower on the way, and I'll be testing the snow blower out later this season when we eventually get some snow here in Missouri. This is also good for folks who are tech savvy and don't mind tweaking the settings until they get it just perfect. This is great for people who really take a lot of time with their lawn and want to dial things in just perfectly. Now let's talk about the other side of the coin. Who really shouldn't go with something like this? Well, if you've got a complex suburban layout with narrow corridors, tight corners, and a lot of fencing, then you might want to avoid this mower and go with something a lot smaller. I'm kind of hoping they come out with a Yarbo Junior for smaller yards that still give you that capability of being modular. I have no idea if that's coming, but that'd be awesome to see. You also might want to look at upgrading to the Mower Pro if you've got relatively tall grass that you mow occasionally. A lot of users with bigger lawns really seem to love the Mower Pro and its capabilities. So just keep that in mind if you're choosing between the standard or Pro mowing unit. And if you're not really tech savvy and you just want to set it up and go, you're going to have to do some tweaking. So you might still want to pay your lawn service if you don't want to go through the hassle of setting it up. But in my opinion, once you get it tweaked and dialed in, it really is set it and forget it. I've only had to mess with the pattern a couple of times, and that's just because I get more bold through the season. Now let's talk about the all-important point, the cost. Now the system starts off at $399.99 for the core unit. And then if you want to add a mowing deck or a snow bundle, that'll raise it to about $499.99. And if you want to move up to the Pro mower, that's $599.99. Now I realize that isn't cheap and not for everybody. But if you put all this against the cost of a zero-turn mower, plus fuel, upkeep, and your time, if you have the right property, it can really give you some nice value. Especially with the added bonus of adding the snow or leaf modules. That can save you a ton of time year-round. Now right now, I only let the Yarbo do the outside of my yard because inside of the fence, it has some issues getting around some of the obstacles back here. So I still have an older mower that takes care of this back here. But here's some tips that I have if this was my only mower. I'd go all the way up to the Pro deck if you have taller or denser grass. If you have a nice suburban lawn that's pretty easy to get around, you can go with the standard no problem. But if you're buying this for 3 or 4 acres, you're probably gonna encounter grass that's gonna be taller or denser. So you might go with the Pro Deck there. Also spend as much time as you can getting the RTK placement just right. It'll pay dividends in the future. And leave a lot of your difficult corners or areas for an electric trimmer. Now, unfortunately, you can't get rid of your trimmer quite yet, but in March, they are releasing their new trimmer attachment for the Yarbo. I'm super excited about this because it should take care of all the little spots that I have troubles with. So stay tuned for that, hopefully coming up this spring. So big thank you goes out to Yarbo for meeting with me back in Vegas at CES this year and sending this unit out early in the spring. It's been nice to actually try something for the entire year without any pressure of putting out any videos until I'm completely done. So I really appreciate it, and the Yarbo team has been great answering questions and dealing with issues like my broken blade. Now, if you do want to go deeper, I've linked all the current pricing and details down in the description. You can check out both the official Yarbo website, which has a lot of great resources on it, or also look at them through the Amazon links. And of course, if you do use those links, it goes to support the channel at no additional cost to you. Now, if you'd like to see some of the other features of the Yarbo, like towing or the core unit, I've got a couple of shorts in a playlist right over here. Or if you want to check out my other outdoor robot videos, I've got a playlist right over here. Thanks again, and I'll see you on the next video.